story number 3, school board showdown.
I started the spring off, or whenever, as a white supremacist, anti-racist, transphobic person. Then I morphed into a domestic terrorist. And it looks like I'm starting to come out the other side, and I'm just a concerned, angry dad. And I want safety for our children.
Well, that was Scott Smith. He was tackled and arrested at a school board meeting after claiming that the district covered up 2 sexual assaults, including one involving his own daughter, and a boy wearing a skirt attacked her in the bathroom, all in an effort to protect the district's plan to enact a sweeping transgender bathroom policy. The mainstream media and the National School Board Association labeling him, as you heard there, an unhinged father and likening him to a domestic terrorist. This all happening in Loudoun County, Virginia, a liberal stronghold not far from Washington, D.C. This incident was just one of several questionable decisions made by the school board right there. And joining us now to discuss is Scott Mineo, himself a father of a Loudoun County student and the founder of Parents Against Critical Race. So Scott, I first want to start with that individual situation. We know that a school superintendent has since stepped down, although not citing that individual situation. Is that enough?
Well, to clarify, it was a school board member, not the superintendent, and it's a start. Okay, it's a start. So where we're at is we have a superintendent that is a habitual liar. His name is Dr. Scott Ziegler. Then we have a school board that continues to lie. And what I mean by that is just in 2 days this week, there's one school board member, Joseph Reeser, that came out and said this week on Thursday that this week was the first they had ever heard of any sexual assault or of the incidents, rather the rapes. And then another school board member by the name of Jeff Morris said the same thing. Well, here we are in October. We put out a little story about it, how it ties in with HB 257, which is if we have a chance to talk about it, it's a very disgusting bill. But for these board members to get up there and say, we've never heard of this is brand new to us, either you're a liar, you're feckless, or you're incompetent, and I think they're all of them.
Well, yeah, let's dig into this a little bit, because we know that, for example, on that day in question, there was a police report filed. We now know that a school board member has resigned. And so I guess there is a question of why wasn't this addressed earlier? Why wasn't there immediate accountability if there was a report, there was evidently wrongdoing?
So I'm going to go back a few years. Do you recall the Parkland shooting in Florida?
Of course.
Okay, so that was, the reason for that is something called Promise Policy 5006, right? So essentially what that does is it allowed the principal and superintendent to basically take incidents, reportable incidents, and determine whether or not they wanted to turn them over to the police department. So fast forward a couple of years, here we are in Virginia with HB 257, an identical policy that has identical comments in there that it gives the principal and the superintendent an out, right? If they want to make something reportable, or a reportable incident, they can turn it over to the police department. Or they cannot. And they're not able to be held civilly liable. This was a policy that went in place July 1st, 2020 last year. So even though we're not talking about 17 dead, we're talking about 2 girls that were raped in a school by the same kid being protected by this superintendent. He needs to go.
So then when we talk about this conversation, oftentimes critical race theory comes in. Is it the idea that perhaps the school board's priorities are just out of sync, not with what the parents want from their district? Or are you saying that there's maybe some type of tie between the two?
No, I would say their priorities are out of sync, but I would say that they're lying to not know. So, for example, there was a question that came up in a board meeting a few years ago in 2018. There was an awful sexual assault at Tuscarora High School here in Leesburg in Loudoun County. And when Beth Thorne asked the question of the other school board members, nobody knew anything about it, except there were 2 school board members, Brenda Sheridan and Jeff Morris, that were school board members at that time, but they did not raise their hand or acknowledge knowing anything about that incident. So we have liars, and we have people running for cover, right? And what we want to do is rip off those covers, because somebody's going to be held accountable.
Yeah. And so over the past year, we have seen a record amount of number of parents deciding to go to charter schools, private schools, and an initial thought when I was looking at the data, I assumed that it was because they were holding in-person learning as compared to maybe remote learning amid the pandemic. But do you think a lot of parents are taking things like this into consideration, whether it's the implementation of CRT or not enough accountability over school boards? Do you think that's a factor?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, the CRT came on the scene last year. It's really garnered a lot of attention in our school system, our county here in Loudoun County. But now there's the next evolution. And if there's not a more of a mass exodus after this, after what I'm about to share with you, I don't know what's going to do. Social emotional learning, it's also known as SEL. And this is the information, the materials that manifests itself into the classrooms and ultimately into our students' head, right? So this is how it's actually being done. So, for example, you have something called Second Step. Second Step is also partnered with Panorama. Panorama is A.G. Garland's son-in-law's company, right? So what they do is they collect data. Second Step puts a lot of this insidious information into our schools' hands. The administration lies to you, and we have FOIAs over this that's provable. They don't want to share with you all the information that they're collecting. They tell you they're not collecting any data on your students. But when we just held a workshop today for parents and teachers here in Ashburn and in Loudoun County, because we are exposing and uncovering and presenting the information that parents need to know. To get angry, they need to get angry and feel pain. And when you understand the material that's in your kid's classroom, that's going to do it.
Yeah.
And either you're going to jump on board and we're really going after this, or you're going to yank them and put them at a charter school or a homeschool. So
Yeah.
the long-winded answer to your question, yes.
No, I think you're exactly right. At the end of the day, individuals' kids is always going to come first, no matter what. And if anything gets in the way of that, whether it's the Virginia race, whether it's these types of incidents, parents are going to take action. I think it's a lesson for everyone that they can learn. Scott Minio, I really appreciate you coming on tonight because it's a story that's sweeping the nation and one that deserves some accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And an iconic Super Bowl winning coach is out of